Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone. My name is Jimmy Fong, the head of the Division of Environment. I'm very happy today. Give me this opportunity to introduce our very distinguished speaker today, Professor Amory Lovins, who is a physicist, environmental scientist, writer, chief scientist of the Rocky Mountain Institute, which he co-founded in 1982. He has worked in the field of energy policy and related areas for 4 decades. He was named by Times Magazine one of the world's 100 most influential people in 2009, and Foreign Policy Magazine one of the 100 top global thinkers. Amory is among the world's leading innovators in energy. Megawatt power is the theoretical unit of power represent an amount of energy saved. The energy saved is direct result of energy conservation or increased energy efficiency. Amory has advocated a megawatt revolution. He sees megawatt market as a win-win solution to many environmental problems because it is now generally cheaper to save fuel than to burn it. Global warming, acid rain, and urban smog can be reduced, not at a cost, but at a profit. Now, Amory has received many honorable doctorates and won many awards, such as Times Hero for the Planet, Times International Hero of the Environment, the World Technology Award. He has briefed 20 heads of state and delivered thousands of lectures and published 31 books and 500 publications, span many disciplines, such as poetry, landscape photography, and music. And he's a pianist and a composer. So you can see he has many talents. So with many talents, of course, he's a very busy man. So Amory has a very busy schedule today. Gave a talk in CUHK this morning and had a lunch meeting with CLP and give a seminar here in HKUST. Not yet, and he will going to have a dinner with the Secretary for the Environment, Mr. Wong Kam Sing, this evening. As you may be aware, just a couple of weeks ago, March 19th to be exact, and the Hong Kong government launched a 3-month public consultation on the future fuel mix for the electricity generation for Hong Kong. No doubt Amory will advise Mr. Wong what the Hong Kong energy mix should be. With the different combination of gas, nuclear, coal, and renewable, the mix will become the core of the city energy policy, determining how far it can go in improving air quality and migrating climate change. Without further ado, I will leave the floor to Mr. Professor Amory for his talk, Reinventing the Fire.
谢谢。大家好，我叫卢安武。很抱歉，普通话说得不好，所以今天只好说英文。Actually, when I lived in England 14 years, they said I couldn't speak English either, but I'll try to improvise. I'm very happy to be back here and have the honor of sharing with you and updating the findings of an ambitious synthesis of American energy solutions with wide application, including Hong Kong. 61 of us did this work over 6 quarters with much help from industry and building on 3 decades of practice across all the energy-using sectors and most kinds of supply. Our findings were summarized in a rigorous but readable and graphics-rich business book called Reinventing Fire. It's been translated also into Chinese, by Henan Science and Technology Press, although they left out the references, which are in the English version. And you may wonder about this strange title. Well, we started with this big poetic title because long ago fire made us human, then fossil fuels made us modern, but now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. That's now become possible and indeed cheaper than what we are doing, so let's see how. 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning each year about 20 cubic kilometers of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. Those fossil fuels have built our civilization, created our wealth, enriched the lives of billions of people, but their rising costs to our security, health, environment, economy are eroding, if not actually outweighing their benefits. So we need a new fire. And switching from the old fire to the new fire means changing two big stories, oil and electricity, each of which puts 2/5 of the fossil carbon into the air. These stories today are less than 1% connected in the United States, only a few percent connected in the world, but their uses are similarly concentrated. 3/4 of the oil in the United States, for example, fuels transport, 3/4 of the electricity powers buildings, and the rest of both run factories. So very efficient vehicles and land use, buildings, factories will save oil and the coal that makes 2/5 of the world's electricity and natural gas that can displace them both. But today's energy system is not just inefficient, it's also disconnected, aging, dirty, and insecure, so it needs refurbishment. By 2050, though, it could become efficient, connected, and distributed with elegantly frugal vehicles, buildings, and factories, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. So the United States, for example, could eliminate its addiction to oil and coal by 2050 and use a third less natural gas, whilst switching to threefold more efficient use and 3/4 renewable supplies. That's the transition I will summarize. And we found that by 2050, this could cost the United States $5 trillion less in net present value than business as usual, assuming that all carbon emissions and other hidden or external costs are worth zero, a conservatively low estimate. But this cheaper energy system could support a 2.6-fold bigger economy, all without needing any oil or coal or nuclear energy. And this transition would need no new inventions and no new national taxes, subsidies, mandates, or laws, thus going around Washington gridlock. So I'm going to tell you how the United States, for example, can get completely off oil and coal, $5 trillion cheaper, with no act of Congress led by business for profit. Many policy changes are needed to enable and speed this transition, but they can all be done administratively or at a subnational level. In the United States, as in China, 天高皇帝远, and much of our initiative comes from the subnational level, for example, from the SAR. So don't think that what you do in this small place is unimportant. It can have a huge influence on all of China and Asia and the world. And in the United States, of course, we've long made most of our energy policy at the state level anyway, rather than the national level. So the idea is to use our most effective institutions, which in America means private enterprise co-evolving with civil society, sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. And this is also trans-ideological, because whether you care most about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or national security, or environmental stewardship, creation care, climate, public health, reinventing fire makes sense and makes money. Now, normally, if we have a tough problem, we take the cleaver and try to chop it into smaller bite-sized pieces, but this actually makes it more difficult. General Eisenhower had some better advice that expanding the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by including more options, more synergies, more degrees of freedom, everything that the solution requires. So we need to move the boundaries of the problem out, not in. And therefore, in Reinventing Fire, we integrated all 4 sectors that use energy: transport, buildings, industry, and electricity. And we integrated 4 kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, the way technologies are combined, And not just public policy, but also new business models, new competitive strategies. And these combinations give much more than the sum of their parts and often create some deeply disruptive business opportunities. I'm going to start with technology, and in automobiles, the biggest oil user, there's obviously much more detail about that, but I want to focus more later on electricity, so I'm going to skip over most of the auto material and just say that weight causes 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car, and every unit of energy we save at the wheels by taking out weight or drag saves another 6 units we don't need to waste getting it to the wheels, so it leverages 7 units of fuel savings at the tank. So 15 years ago, my team and a pair of European Tier 1s designed this uncompromised mid-sized SUV made of carbon fiber weighing less than half normal, about 4 to 6 times more efficient than normal, 2-year payback at US fuel price. 8 years ago, Toyota showed such a concept car with the interior volume of a Prius, but half its fuel use and 1/3 its weight. This 4-seat car weighs 420 kilograms. And now 1 and 2 liter equivalent per 100 kilometer carbon fiber electric cars are on the market from Volkswagen and from BMW, which confirm that the carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries. I brought along a carbon cap today. It's a test piece for military helmets that have been shipping for a few years. And it's a bit of carbon fiber and thermoplastic that was made with a process one of our spin-offs developed and then spun off to the global supply chain 2 years ago. And this process that made this part in 1 minute 8 years ago can now make a complex 2x2 meter part in 1 minute. Don't worry about dropping it. It's tougher than titanium. The journalist Tom Friedman hit it with a sledgehammer as hard as he could and couldn't even make a mark on it. So if we made all US autos in this way, we would save 1.5 Saudis or half an OPEC worth of oil, 15 million barrels a day, by drilling in a very prospective play called the Detroit Formation. And the cost of saving a barrel this way is about $18 and falling. That's to pay for the electrification. The ultralighting turns out to be approximately free, paid for by the 3 times smaller powertrain and by much simpler automaking with 80% less capital. There are so few parts and they snap precisely together without needing a body shop or a paint shop. Now, ultralight electric vehicles can spread and their prices can drop even faster with a temporary policy called a feebate, that is rebates for efficient new cars paid for by fees on inefficient ones. The biggest of 6 feebate programs in France tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency in the first 2 years, and the strongest feebate in Norway raised electrified vehicles market share to 12.5% last year, which is 10 times the US level. There is also, by the way, a new feebate in Singapore. The same sorts of physics and business logic apply also to heavy vehicles. Walmart's heavy lorries now move each case of product using half the fuel that they used 10 years ago through both logistical and technical improvements. And that plus, well, just the technological improvements fully pursued can save 2/3 of the fuel in heavy lorries. And that plus the tripled to quintupled efficiency airplanes designed at Boeing and NASA and MIT can save the United States $0.9 trillion US net present value. But in both heavy and light vehicles, today's military revolution in energy efficiency will speed all these advances in the civilian sector, which uses over 50 times as much oil, much as military R&D gave us the internet, the global positioning system, the jet engine and microchip industries, only this time that leverage back to the civilian sector can speed America's and China's path off oil so nobody needs to fight over oil, and our respective warfighters can have neg emissions in the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. Mission unnecessary. They really like that idea. Autos are not just becoming 4 to 8 times more efficient, they're also being driven less, even in Europe and America, where petrol use has been falling since 2007. Generations X and Y tend not even to want to own a car because it's cheaper and easier not to. A young Londoner or Shanghainese on an evening out can combine many different modes because smartphone apps bridge the once awkward route gaps by summoning ubiquitous transport services on demand. One lady in San Francisco just blogged that she was saving $11,000 US a year by replacing her car with Uber, Lyft, public transit like the local version of the MRT, walking, biking, and a smartphone app called Get Around, which lets you hire a neighbor's car when it's unneeded and parked, as US cars are 96% of the time. So seamlessly linking access options with needs makes you confident you won't need a car. But if you did, you don't need to own it. In some Chinese cities, renting a Kandi electric vehicle from this giant vending machine costs about 25 Hong Kong dollars an hour. Also, renting shared cars when you need them can boost their utilization by about tenfold, and then probably redouble it with partly or fully autonomous vehicles like this Mercedes concept car. Google actually plans to release self-driving cars in the next 3 years. The biggest American company, which is called Apple, is developing them too. They're already legal in 4 of the United States, and they are the theme of the European Union presidency by Holland next year. Autonomy makes electric vehicles' total cost per kilometer about 40% lower than that of fueled vehicles because their tenfold lower energy cost per kilometer more than offsets their higher capital cost. So the mashup of mobility with IT means radically fewer vehicles, all electric, driving a lot fewer total kilometers. Shared EVs providing mobility services could drive easily 1 million kilometers in their lives because the carbon fiber doesn't dent, rust, or fatigue. So autos are morphing, as we made up this acronym, from pigs to seals, that is, from personal internal combustion gasoline steel-dominated vehicles to shareable electrified autonomous lightweight service vehicles. Their business and marketing case is strong, and they will further speed the day when cars use no oil. Meanwhile, China's 3,000 kilometers of bus rapid transit, BRT, may quintuple in the next 5 years. That's a low-tech, high-design, retrofittable innovation. It transformed this Hangzhou Street into this Hangzhou Street as a retrofit, and it carries about 800,000 riders a day. Over 30 million commuters use BRT daily in 200 cities worldwide. And this can achieve MRT-like route density at about 5% the cost. This was invented by the architect mayor of Curitiba, Brazil, Jaime Lerner. And he invented it as a cheaper, faster, better alternative to cars and deployed it throughout his city of 2 million people in just 4 years, losing only a few buildings and achieving Brazil's lowest car drivership and cleanest urban air, even though they had the second highest car ownership in Brazil. Now, BRT and other non-car modes are reshaping the America's worth of new cities that China plans for the next 15 years. The urban architect Peter Calthorpe is helping redesign Chongqing around 1.5 million pairs of feet rather than around cars, so the driving will fall by 2/3. Integrating and distributing where people live, work, shop, and play means people need not travel far nor by car. And it's a rather simple concept that the 13-lane super boulevards are replaced by a pair of 1-lane, one-way streets. And between those pairs, a car-free BRT street, and between those, pedestrian and bicycle streets. So this shift from a superblock arterial vehicle network to a capillary web builds a human ecology with vibrant commerce, rich social interaction, 1/3 less concrete, but equal or better throughput, cleaner air, happier citizens, and the 53 cities already adopting this design and others that imitate them will use little oil. Even in the car-dominated United States, where we've already built cities around cars, not people, such new urbanist smart growth plus mobility IT integration and charging real-time driving costs per kilometer, not per liter, can provide the same or better access with 46 to 84% less driving at lower cost and with higher profits for the developers. So that's another driver of less automobility, but even assuming much more of all kinds of mobility in the United States, the most car-ridden society, 35 years hence, we could be using no oil. Saving or displacing each barrel at an average cost that works out to about $25 US rather than buying it for over 100 saves about $4 trillion net present value, or about 12 trillion if we'd counted just the hidden economic and military costs of US oil dependence. To get the mobility without oil, to phase out the oil, we first get efficient, then switch fuels. We use the efficiency baked into the government forecast, plus the vehicle fitness they didn't count, plus more productive use of vehicles. And then those 1 or 2 liter equivalent per 100 kilometer autos can use any mixture of hydrogen fuel cells in green, electricity in yellow, and advanced biofuels in orange. The heavy lorries and airplanes can realistically use advanced biofuels or hydrogen. The lorries could even burn natural gas, but no vehicles will need oil. And any biofuels the U.S. might need, at most 3 million barrels a day, could be made 2/3 from waste and without displacing cropland or harming climate or soil. So our little team speeds these oil savings by institutional acupuncture. That is where the business logic is congested and not flowing properly. We insert little needles in carefully chosen spots in partners like Ford and Walmart and the Pentagon to get that entrepreneurial juice flowing. And this long transition is already so well underway that 5 years ago, some mainstream analysts began to see peak oil not in supply but in demand. Because like whale oil in the 1850s, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. But electrified autos need not add new burdens to the electricity system. Rather, when smart autos exchange electrons and information through smart buildings with smart grids, they are adding to the grid valuable flexibility and distributed storage that can help the grid to accept varying solar and wind power. So electrified autos make the auto and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately. And they also converge the oil story with our second big story. And by the way, the guy that said that just got promoted. Our second big story, which is saving electricity and then making it differently. And those twin revolutions in electricity are already bringing more numerous, diverse, and profound disruptions than in any other sector as 21st century technology and speed collide head-on with 20th and even 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Lighting technology illustrates this disruptive speed. Thomas Edison's electric lamps got 11 times more efficient, but it took 130 years. Meanwhile, new types of lamps slowly followed and improved. But then, like a thunderbolt, came white LEDs. Each decade, they get 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, and 10 times cheaper. That's why McKinsey forecasts they will cut costs and grow revenues 30% a year, and 5 years from now will have taken over 2/3 of the world's general lighting market. So they're rocking the $200 billion a year lighting services market, and since lighting uses 1/7 of the world's electricity, they're also disrupting the business model of electric utilities because it's the wrong model. You see, Thomas Edison, when he developed the grid in the early 1880s, didn't sell kilowatt hours. He sold light. He would charge you a penny to run a lamp for an hour. And he probably didn't foresee that his lamps would ultimately become so antique they would be outlawed. But he certainly did see that they would become far more efficient. And he said to his colleagues who wanted to stop selling light and start selling kilowatt hours so they could serve motors as well, he said, look, I can tell you as an inventor, lamps will become much more efficient. And when they do, if we're selling lighting services, our cost of providing that service will go down. Whereas if we're selling kilowatt hours, we will simply sell fewer of them. It's the lamp makers who will make the profit. They overruled him in 1892 in New York Edison Company, and we've been making the same mistake ever since, selling the kilowatt hour, not the service people want it for, and therefore ensuring that as customers get more efficient, the electric company will have less revenue rather than less cost. You see, the basic revolution going on in electricity is customers are figuring out that they can and should buy fewer electrons and use them far more productively and perhaps produce some of their own. And it's generally a good idea to sell customers what they want before someone else does. All the rest is detail. Please remember, by the way, the steep slope of this LED efficiency curve, because we're going to see it again in a few minutes in a graph of the cost of photovoltaics, which in physics terms are rather like LEDs inside out. Now, changing how we make electricity gets easier as we need less of it. Today, most of it is wasted, and efficiency techniques keep improving faster than they're installed, so the potential savings, the resource of negawatts still unbought, keeps getting bigger and cheaper. You know, the low-hanging fruit grows back faster than we can pick it. But as buildings and industry start to catch up and get efficient faster than they grow, America's electricity use, instead of growing 1% a year as officially forecast, could actually shrink 1% a year after allowing for the extra use by the efficient cars. And that's actually happening. U.S. electric use peaked in 2007. And we can keep it dropping by reasonably accelerating existing trends. Specifically, our analysis found over the next 40 years, U.S. buildings can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, saving $1.4 trillion US net present value with a 33% internal rate of return. So the savings are worth 4 times their cost. Industry can also accelerate, doubling its energy productivity with a 21% IRR. And to do all that by 2050, we would need, by 2030, just to ramp up the national average adoption of efficiency to levels that were achieved 10 years ago in our northwestern states. The key to such big savings is a disruptive innovation we've hatched at our institute called integrative design. It often makes very large energy savings cost less than small ones, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. I mentioned briefly how lightweighting autos shrinks their propulsion system, helping enable and pay for the advanced electric propulsion because you need 3 times fewer batteries. Well, in the same way, integrative design can do this for buildings and factories, radically reducing electric and gas demand so renewables can more readily serve the rest. So let's see this starting in buildings, which use 3/4 of U.S. electricity and 1/3 of directly used natural gas. Integrative design is how our 2010 retrofit is saving 2/5 of the energy in the Empire State Building. We started by remanufacturing 6,514 windows on site in a temporary window factory on a vacant floor into super windows whose special coatings let them pass light through but block heat. They also insulate 4 times better. And that, plus better lights and office equipment and so on, cut the maximum cooling load by 1/3. Then renovating smaller chillers instead of adding bigger ones saved $17 million of capital cost, which paid for most of the energy-saving improvements and cut the payback time to 3 years. That's the same payback a major energy service company was offering, but with disintegrated design yielding only a sixth as big savings. And by the way, if we'd counted the non-energy benefits to productivity and health and reduced absenteeism and greater real estate value and so on, the owner's actual payback would be well under 1 year. Another example, in a retrofit design for an 18,000 square meter curtain wall office building in Chicago with dark double glazing whose seals had failed, so you have to replace them every 20 years, 3/4 of the total energy could be saved by an integrative retrofit costing slightly less than the regular 20-year renovation that saves nothing. It was about a -5-month payback. And that's because the mechanical system could become not 1/3 smaller as in the Empire State Building, but 3/4 smaller because it's all glass rather than mostly opaque wall area. And by the way, Chicago is about as hot and humid in the summer as Hong Kong, but much colder in the winter. Let me give an example now for a small building, not because I think you have single-family houses here, but to make a point about building physics. It gets harder, of course, with small buildings because they have a bigger surface-to-volume ratio. So my example is about how to create a little bit of Hong Kong climate high in the Rocky Mountains of western Colorado. That's where I live. This is my house and research center and indoor farm. It's 2,200 meters up near Aspen, where temperatures used to dip as low as -44 Celsius. And you can get continuous midwinter cloud up to 39 days. This helped inspire over 30,000 European passive buildings that, like this one, need and have no heating system, but have roughly normal construction costs, and they can look like whatever you want. Now, let's go into the central atrium under super windows that insulate like 16 sheets of glass, but look like 2 and cost less than 3. And inside, it looks like Hong Kong or Hainan. But this is in a February snowstorm, but there are 5 banana crops ripening. This is a twin crop we harvested recently. Actually, it harvested itself by pulling down the tree, and we're now on banana crop number 58. Now, when I moved in 1984, this house was saving 99% of the normal space and water heating energy, about 90% of the household electricity and half the water, all with a 10-month payback. That's 1983 technology. Today's are much better, so we've lately retrofitted them, and we're measuring how much better they are. The trouble is that they seem to use less energy than the monitoring system that's measuring them. So we do no combustion in this house. That's so 20th century. And our house is a net exporter of electricity and bananas. Now, our partners have used integrative design to eliminate air conditioning in ordinary-looking new houses up to 46 Celsius with better comfort and lower construction cost in a fairly dry climate. But even in Bangkok, such integrative design has saved 90% of air conditioning energy in a new house with better comfort and normal construction cost. Everybody in Hong Kong lives in that sort of climate. Everybody in China lives in a climate, in the world indeed, lives in a climate somewhere between Bangkok and Old Snowmass, Colorado. But wherever you live, the key is integrative design that gives many benefits from each expenditure. So this white arch, for example, holding up the middle of my house, has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. How fast is the state-of-the-art moving? Well, we thought the 38% energy saving wasn't too bad for the Empire State Building when we did that retrofit 5 years ago. 3 years later, we saved 70% retrofitting this difficult old federal government office building in Denver, and with a good economic case. And that made it a little more efficient than the most efficient new U.S. office, which in turn is only half as efficient as our own new office being built right now with no central heating or cooling equipment and a good business case. That's how fast the state of the art is moving from 277 or a national median 293 kilowatt hours total energy use per square meter year measured at the building to nowadays 40 or 50. And actually somewhere in that range has already been achieved by the Bullitt Foundation office in cloudy Seattle. And of course, that building and our building are both net exporters of electricity. Even in the worst hot, humid climates in Singapore and in India, our partners are likewise saving about 80% of the energy with 10 or 20% lower capital cost, and then the photovoltaics on the building make the rest. And I think in Hong Kong you should demand similar performance, but here's an interesting opportunity. Dutch social housing, only say 2 stories high, this is a 5-unit building, has about a 1.5 or 2,000 euro per unit per year energy bill. But now a consortium of the developer BAM, social housing corporations, and several public partners are doing mass efficiency upgrades of ordinary flats so they will produce at least as much solar energy as they use. That is, they're being retrofitted to net zero by the means described. And they are very close now by industrializing the retrofit process in the first 11,000 units to being able to do this without subsidy. They think they'll be without subsidy within about another year because the saved energy finances the retrofit, even to net zero standard. Now, to be sure, Hong Kong has a completely different climate and culture and building style, but we could quickly learn by doing how close we can get in your high-rise housing to net zero energy, and how much of the retrofit can be standardized and mass-produced, as the Dutch designers are doing. So there may also be some interesting side benefits. For example, if you do distributed capture of the distilled water from condensate, that should reduce the costs of buying water and having to pump it up in the building, which is a very large use of electricity in Hong Kong. Integrative design can also increase the savings in industry. Dow Chemical, for example, has saved $9 for every dollar it's invested in efficiency, but there's much more to do. For example, 3/5 of the world's electricity runs motors, half of that runs pumps and fans, and we can make those much better. There are about 35 things we can do as an integrated package to save half the energy in the motor systems with about a year's payback. But first, we should be capturing bigger and cheaper savings normally ignored, not in the textbooks, not in the forecasts. For example, pumps. The biggest use of motors move liquids through pipes. But using techniques from my Chinese mentor Liang Lok in Singapore, a typical industrial pumping loop for a Shanghai factory was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, within the normal 80 to 90% savings range. Not by getting better pumps and motors and controls, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. This also shrinks the pumping equipment and its capital costs. So this is not a new technology. This is rearranging our metal furniture as designers. And in my own house, this method recently saved about 97% of the pumping energy in some new piping. Now, what does such savings mean for the electricity that is 3/5 used in motors? And I just told you about pumping, the biggest use of motors, and the second biggest use is fans, which have the same physics. Well, from the coal burnt in the power plant, there are so many compounding losses that only about 1/10 of the fuel energy comes out the pipe as flow. But if we turn those compounding losses round backwards, right to left, they become compounding savings, and every unit of flow or friction we save in the pipe compounds back again to save 10 units of fuel cost, pollution, and global weirding back at the power station. And as we go upstream, the components get smaller and the capital cost goes down. Our team has lately found such snowballing energy savings in over $40 billion worth of diverse industrial redesigns, from this Hewlett-Packard data center and Texas Instruments chip fab to Rio Tinto and Anglo-American mines and Shell hydrocarbon facilities and many others. And typically we find the retrofit designs save about 30 to 60% of the energy with 2 or 3 year paybacks, whilst the new facility designs do a bit better, around 40 to 90% savings, with generally lower capital cost. This data center is particularly interesting because I understand you have a lot of them here. We were doing this with EDS, which at the time was becoming part of Hewlett-Packard. And because the client wouldn't allow most of the recommendations to be adopted, they were extraordinarily conservative, we were only able to triple the efficiency with the same capital cost. However, EDS said that had the client allowed them to adopt most of the recommendations EDS agreed with, which was almost all of them, we would have saved roughly 95% of the energy and half the total capital cost. That's, I think, where the state of the art was 5 years ago. Now it's rather better than that. Now, as buildings and industry get efficient faster than they grow, the electricity demand has fallen in the United States as in Europe and Japan, and this helps renewables displace coal and gas-fired electricity. So on a logarithmic scale, here's what happened already to the price of photovoltaic modules and of wind farms. So it's not surprising that renewables have lately been about 2/3 of the new capacity added in China, over 70% in Europe, about half in the United States. And in 20 of the United States, entrepreneurs will now install rooftop photovoltaics with no money down, soon cash back, and beat your electric bill. Deutsche Bank says this will be profitable in about 80% of the world in 2 more years. I think they're right. And bypassing electric companies the way mobile phones bypassed wireline phone companies gives electricity executives nightmares and venture capitalists sweet dreams. The batteries, too, are getting rapidly cheaper. The technology driven by consumer electronics, the volume driven by electric cars, that lets more customers drop off the grid altogether if they get annoyed with their electric company. And this leaves the old utility business models no place to hide. We wrote a paper on this called The Economics of Grid Defection, showing that the ability to do so would roll across the United States well within the lives of existing utility assets. And partly as a result of that paper, Barclays downgraded the whole US utility sector, which interestingly in the capital market today pays about 200 or 300 basis points more for capital than the solar installers like SolarCity are paying. That is, the investors have decided that utilities are the risky play and solar is the low-risk play. Also, the competition is not just in capital cost and risk, but also in revenue models. Renewables have no operating costs, so when you flip the switch, you aren't sending your utility any more revenue. And also, his new oil or gas well makes my next one cost more. Her new solar panel makes my next one cost less. Do you really think fossil fuels are going to win that game? Well, Bloomberg thinks not, and they project in the next 15 years the added capacity from fossil and nuclear plants will go down by half, not counting their larger retirements, whilst the additions by renewables will treble. And here's the market evidence of how that works. This is the actual net additions of capacity in wind and solar each year worldwide. They and minor renewables make up the majority of the new capacity added in each of recent years. And each of the past 4 years, these modern renewables have got $250 billion US of private investment and added over 80 gigawatts. They have surpassed the total installed capacity worldwide of nuclear energy, which actually had a loss of capacity even before Fukushima. And the global orders for nuclear and coal plants continue to fade away because they have too much cost and too much financial risk to attract investors. And interestingly, by far the dominant force in these renewable markets is China, which in 2012, 13, 14, made more wind power than nuclear power. In 2013, China added more solar electric capacity than the United States has added since we invented photovoltaics 60 years ago. That happened in 1 year. And now E.ON, Germany's biggest utility, is splitting in two, giving the big thermal stations, which are unprofitable, back to the shareholders, while the core strategy shifts to efficiency, demand response, renewables, smart grid, customer service offerings. And E.ON is not alone in betting big on this transformation. Germany's second biggest utility, RWE, just announced the same shift of emphasis, though without the split. The legendary investor Warren Buffett has put $17 billion into wind and photovoltaics and says he's going to double that. So I think we need to discuss whether Asian electricity companies should ignore, deny, resist, diversify, hedge, finance, transform, or decline. There are lots of choices. And this disruption is just starting. This graph shows a meteor strike, photovoltaics and wind, that just happened to just the fuel costs of fossil fuel generation. This is what a game changer looks like. And of course, it's self-feeding because the cheaper renewable power gets, the more we build. So the cheaper it gets, so the more we build. And you can see this in a little animation we did. Modern renewables scale up in a fundamentally different way because we're used to building cathedral-like power plants that take some years to design and license and build. But meanwhile, with about the same capital, you can build each year a photovoltaic factory that each year thereafter produces enough solar cells to produce each year thereafter as much electricity as your cathedral will produce once you build it. So just the first decade of this little thought experiment, you've got already 15 times as much electricity from the solar option. And that helps explain why solar output worldwide is scaling faster than mobile phones. However, we're often told that only coal and combined cycle gas and nuclear stations can keep the lights on because they are 24/7, whilst wind power and photovoltaics are variable and thus supposedly unreliable. So I'd like to explain why neither part of that statement is true. First of all, variable does not mean unreliable. Here is how accurately the French grid operator was able in a stormy winter month to forecast a day ahead the output of the country's wind farms in green. The green is the actual a day later. And I'll bet they wish they could forecast demand that well. Secondly, we built the grid because no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when a giant coal or nuclear plant fails, you lose 1 billion watts in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. You have in Hong Kong an extraordinarily reliable electricity system, but some things break sometimes. And the reason we built the grid, and a lot of backup investment, was to handle this intermittence of the big thermal plants that come in big lumps. And it's handled routinely by backing up failed plants with working plants. But in the same way, and often at lower cost, the grid can handle the forecastable variations of solar and wind power by backing up variable renewables, mainly with other renewables of other kinds or in other places. So highly reliable power can come from a portfolio of largely or wholly renewable sources when they are forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and location. So let me illustrate that with an aggressive but instructive simulation from the state of Texas. A power pool essentially coincident with the boundaries of Texas called ERCOT is isolated from the rest of the United States. It's not hooked to our eastern or western grid. It's a third grid all on its own. And its expected 2050 summer load shape is like this, or with more efficient use, it's smaller and less peaky, but it's still about 4 times the peak load of CLP. Now, let's do all of this with renewables. The first 86% of the annual electricity needs could be met by a combination of wind and photovoltaics. You can see how variable they really are. And the other 14% from the other renewables, which are dispatchable. You can have them whenever you want, like geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, biogas burnt in existing combustion turbines, municipal solid waste combustion. My favorite is burning obsolete energy studies. And so now we've got 100% renewable supply, but you can see it doesn't match the load shape terribly well. Sometimes we have too much, other times not enough. But now let's take the surpluses and put them into two types of distributed storage. And the only aggressive assumption here is that those will be fully built out by 2050, but it's actually quite feasible to do that. And two types in particular, ice storage air conditioning and smart charging and discharging of electric vehicles, and then we can recover those two kinds of distributed storage in yellow as needed, fill in the last bits with unobtrusively flexible demand that's invisible to the customer. Now we've got completely renewable supply every hour of the year without adding any bulk storage and with only 5% of the renewable generation left over to be spilt. So the economics should be quite good. This is, however, not just theory. Some national grid operators are actually doing this choreography already. Germany last year got 27% of its electricity consumption from renewables, half of them solar and wind. It's about 30% at the moment. But there are actually 4 other European countries not rich in hydro that are up around half renewable. Denmark's around 55% last year, and Scotland 53%. We're just waiting for the final numbers from both. And out on the end of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain 46%, Portugal 64%. They both have hydro, but they're not Norway. They're doing most of it from other renewables. None of these countries is adding bulk storage. They all have superior reliability. There's a general weak trend in Europe that the more renewables you put in, the more reliable your supply gets. And actually, Denmark and Germany have electric supply 10 times as reliable as America's. So these grid operators have gradually figured out how to operate their systems, their assets, much as a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously produces beautiful music. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States has done a very sophisticated simulation of how to provide 80 or 90% renewable electricity reliably. You can see the winds and brass and strings all coming in and out as different sources turn on and off. And the fossil and nuclear, the dark splotches, ramp, but this is only about a 1/3 renewable scenario. They've gone up to 90% and it still works fine. And I think what the evidence is increasingly showing is that largely or wholly renewable power systems may need actually less storage and backup than we've already installed and paid for to manage the intermittence of the big thermal plants. We aren't used to hearing it compared that way because we think of spinning reserve and reserve margin as inevitable system costs, but actually they are the integration cost of the big lumpy units that can fail all at once. Every resource has different integration costs. We have to compare them fairly, and when we do, quite often a good renewable portfolio will need less. Another important part is the right size of generation. Denmark is the best example. They went in 32 years from a handful of giant coal plants to a constellation of wind farms in blue and agricultural waste cogeneration in brown. And they have the most reliable electricity in Europe. It's almost all locally owned, by the way. Denmark is planning completely renewable electricity and total energy by 2050, and they don't think it'll cost more. And meanwhile, they're switching their grid to a distributed so-called cellular architecture that makes cascading blackouts impossible. And another way of looking at what's happening worldwide is these are the actual increases in electric output from what The Economist calls micropower, which is all the renewables except big hydro plus combined heat and power. And together they are a very large resource. They're a quarter of the world's electricity and half the new capacity being added. Not a fringe activity. They're running away with the market. And together, they and efficiency got about $600 billion plus US dollars of global investment in 2013 alone. Now, in America, we have this aging, dirty, insecure electricity system that we have to replace anyway by 2050. And whatever we replace it with is going to cost about the same, whether we buy more of what we have, or new nuclear and clean coal, or centralized renewables, or distributed renewables. But the surprise is that although these cost about the same, they differ profoundly in 7 kinds of risk around national security, fuel, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. For example, we have this over-centralized grid, vulnerable to cascading and potentially economy-shattering blackouts caused by squirrels, tree limbs, operating problems, solar storms, superstorms, earthquakes, physical attack, cyber attack. But this blackout risk disappears, and all the other 6 risks are best managed with distributed renewables reorganized into so-called microgrids that normally interconnect, exchange power freely, but can also, if needed, disconnect fractally, serve critical loads continuously, and reconnect afterwards seamlessly. That is, by the way, the Pentagon's strategy for military power supplies. It's how my house works, very reassuring feeling. And at about the same cost as business as usual, this resilient grid architecture could maximize security, customer choice, entrepreneurial opportunity, and innovation. So I would really suggest that any distributed generation you add in Hong Kong, by default, be able to work safely with or without the grid. And there are agreed industry standards for how to do that. So let me summarize the electricity story. Together, efficient use and diverse, distributed, renewable, resilient supply are starting to transform the sector. Traditionally, utilities would build one or another kind of giant power station, maybe a little efficiency of renewables, and they get rewarded, as they still are in 34 of the United States, for selling you more electricity. But now, especially where regulators instead reward cutting your bills, the market is shifting massively other way up towards efficiency, renewables, cogeneration, distributed storage, smart grids, demand response, ways to bind them all together reliably. And that is most true in the 30-odd states where demand-side and supply-side options compete directly against each other in the same auctions. We've had auctions lately where 90-odd% of the winners are on the demand side once they're actually allowed to compete, megawatts against megawatts. That sounds like a really good idea. And these transitions can be awfully fast. The Stanford Lecturer in Innovation, Tony Seba, found these lovely archive photos of an Easter parade in Fifth Avenue in New York. In 1900, you have to look rather hard to find the first car, which is, let's see, where is it? I think it's right there. And 13 years later, you have to hunt awfully hard to find the last horse. The horse and buggy companies thought they would have forever to make a transition, long after they retired, because you have to build all the roads and petrol stations and traffic lights, signals. But Henry Ford disagreed, and he won. I think the lesson of this is that the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents, but by insurgents. They are not inhibited by the incumbents' business models, cultures, legacy assets, both physical and psychological. By the way, the Model T Ford had a nominal price that fell 62% in 13 years. Photovoltaics have fallen 80% in 5 years. And they're accelerating. And in fact, incumbents have even less grace period than the insurgents grant because investors flee before customers do. Capital markets keenly sniff out disruptions so they can be the first to decapitalize the disruptees and transfer their capital to the disruptors. And this is all, investors acting on leading indicators, gut hunches, herd behavior spreading at the speed of Twitter. And once the capital markets think you are in or heading for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they take the capital out and shift it to your successors. So I actually think the electricity and coal and oil industries are already well along in starting to get decapitalized. Investors, of course, still bear scars from the failure of big old strong companies that didn't survive the IT transition. There's only one survivor on this list, IBM, and it had a near-death experience along the way. But investors did get rewarded by those that did cross this chasm. Many investors now sense the energy industries are starting to be transformed beyond recognition, so they're getting skittish. And these changes are happening well within current planning horizons and much faster than many firms' cultures can gracefully manage. So it really creates a formidable leadership challenge. Jack Welch said correctly, if the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So which of the great companies on the left is going to be brave enough to make that perilous crossing and join the firms on the right? E.ON just did. What about the others? I want to say a little bit about universal energy access. The last lighting market of oil, it's a 155-year-old business started by John D. Rockefeller. If oil's lighting market were a country, it would rank number 8 in carbon emissions, plus huge health costs. And I'm referring, of course, to the kerosene lamps in the huts and hovels of 1.2 billion people, nearly as many as there are in China, with family income around $2 a day and little prospect of getting or affording grid power. Now, these impoverished people now pay $38 billion a year, a fifth of the total cost of global lighting, to produce very inefficiently 1/1000th of the light. But now at a 6,000 times lower cost than the total service cost of a standard battery torch, they can banish darkness, teach their daughters to read, and charge their smartphones, because an entrepreneurial village woman can sell or lease them an integrated package of 25% efficient photovoltaics, high temperature tolerant lithium phosphate batteries, 150 lumen per watt LEDs with excellent optics. It'll do this on one charge for 10 hours or that for 150 hours. It pays back against a kerosene lamp in weeks to months. And if you're not buying the kerosene anymore, it's like earning a perpetual annuity that gives you an extra month's income every year. So if you're leading a fuel or electricity company, to which of these two offerings and strategies would you entrust your firm's future? I think it's pretty clear. To sum up, our energy future is not fate but choice, and the choice is extremely flexible. In 1975, 40 years ago, the US government and industry all insisted that the energy needed to make $1 of GDP could never go down. A year later, I wrote a heretical article in Foreign Affairs saying it could drop by threefold. Well, actually, it's gone down 54% in the first 38 years. But with today's far more powerful technologies, integrative design, enlightened regulation, more mature financing, marketing, and delivery channels, we now see very clearly in Reinventing Fire how to save another threefold, saving twice what I originally thought at a third the real cost. That doesn't count any future innovation, just what's already happened. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it and integrate it. And the results may at first seem incredible, but as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets, small, weak secrets, need protection. Big discoveries, he said, are protected by public incredulity. Now, combine the electricity and oil revolutions, and you have the big story, Reinventing Fire, where business enabled and sped by smart policies in mindful markets can lead even a big country like the United States completely off oil and coal by 2050, saving $5 trillion, growing the economy 2.6-fold, strengthening security, and by eliminating the oil and coal, cutting carbon emissions by 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any one or more of those outcomes, you could support that transition without needing to like every outcome and without needing to agree which outcomes are most important. So focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to our common energy challenge. And these best buys are also the most effective solutions to the big global problems that hazard every country's security and prosperity. So what does this mean for China? Well, 2 months from now, these 4 leading organizations will release a detailed and rigorous analysis prepared by 80 analysts over the last 2 years for the energy authors of the 13th five-year plan. Our preliminary findings show how China could have a 7-fold bigger GDP in 2050 using only slightly more primary energy than now, get half of it from non-fossil sources, all at least 10 trillion yuan cheaper than business as usual if externalities are valued at 0. The 40-odd% lower CO2 and 90-odd% lower air pollution should also greatly improve public health. Energy productivity could rise nearly 6-fold, carbon productivity about 11-fold. So President Xi's peak carbon commitment, though it'll take hard work, could be achieved even sooner. And in fact, China's coal burn already dropped last year, despite 7.4% economic growth. A very encouraging start. Such leadership in stabilizing global climate perfectly fits China's need for non-polluting, high value-added drivers of growth. And clean energy as a growth accelerant reinforces itself because higher volume means lower cost, means higher volume means lower cost, and expands China's global market share. It's also gratifying, by the way, that in the United States, in the first 3 years of our own 40-year journey, we seem nicely on track and actually a bit ahead of target for renewables. So our little team at our independent nonprofit NGO, Rocky Mountain Institute, helps smart companies get unstuck and speed this journey via many initiatives and projects. Of course, there is a lot of old thinking around, too. As former oilman Marie Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But DuPont's former chairman, Edgar Woolard, reminds us that organizations hampered by old thinking won't be a problem, because in the long run, they won't be around. What I've described for you is not just a once-in-a-civilization business opportunity and policy opportunity, but one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species. We humans are inventing a new fire, not dug from below, but flowing from above, not digging up fiery stuff, but harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. And this new fire is quite different. It's not scarce but bountiful, not local but everywhere, not transient but permanent, not costly but free once you've installed the equipment. And but for the transitional tail of natural gas and a little biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless. and efficiently used, it really could make energy do our work without working our undoing. Each of you owns a piece of that prize, and our Zhongxu Nengwen, or Reinventing Fire, will already marshals the US thinking, but the Zhongguo version will marshal the latest China-specific evidence and suggestions just 2 months from now. So with the conversation begun at reinventingfire.com and other references, and soon to expand on a Chinese language website, let me invite each of you to engage with us, with each other, with everyone around you, to help make Hong Kong, China, the world, healthier, richer, fairer, cooler, safer, by together reinventing fire. Thank you for your good work and your kind attention. 谢谢你.
Oh, thank you very much for Avery for his really enlightening talk, and definitely we're going to have a lot of bright future with the new composition of energy and so on. I'm sure our poll will be very interested to talk to him. Consider we have so many new buildings going to come in, and all this energy is going to save, and all this money we put back on education. And certainly it's with that. So let's see any question on the floor. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Lovins. I have 2 questions, but they're kind of related. So you proposed making greater use of carbon fiber in our mobile machinery to reduce the mass of those things. And also photovoltaics and batteries, they require a lot of rare earths. So carbon fiber is known for not being that easy to recycle, and rare earths are quite environmentally damaging to extract from the ground. Do you know of any ways to overcome these?
Yeah. Let's see. Yes, I would propose that most things that move should seriously consider using advanced composites like carbon fiber, especially with the new manufacturing techniques that roughly equalize the cost. There are other advances coming along that will be even more dramatic, but let's start there. And this is not just for vehicles, by the way. I was looking, for example, in the textile industry at the shuttle on looms. It should be ultralight. It has to move back and forth. Anything that moves back and forth should be light. I was looking even at the giant cranes in container ports. They have a huge amount of mass compounding. So this enormous steel structure requires extraordinarily expensive foundations. If you take out most of the weight, most of the cost goes away. There's a lot of mass decompounding. Same with bridges, for example. Carbon fiber, however, is not difficult to recycle. It depends a lot on the manufacturing technique, but if the composite is thermoset-based, you can dissolve away the matrix with solvolysis, typically methanolysis, or you can use low-temperature catalytic pyrolysis and recover the carbon fiber nicely for reuse. It was made at about 1250 Celsius or thereabouts, so it doesn't mind the pyrolysis. And it would be best to recover the carbon in a well-ordered form. You can make the preform into a postform if you design it properly. You can't card it like wool if it gets tangled because it's too stiff. But there are other ways of keeping it from getting tangled. And actually, I would question why you would want, for example, in an auto body, to recycle it after a short period, because the durability is such a great source of value, as I mentioned in the pigs to seals transition. Really, you'd probably want to make it more like an airframe. The airplane you climb into tomorrow could perfectly well be 40 or 50 years old, and you feed it engines and paint and avionics and seats from time to time. But it's still the same well-maintained airframe. And that's metal, which does fatigue. This does not. So you'd really want a business model that rewards the maker and owner for that durability by providing the lease of the service rather than the sale of the product. The rare earth question puzzles me a bit because, in general, the use in batteries and photovoltaics is anywhere from 0 to very small. If you Google, let's see, Lovins Joint Force Quarterly Rare Earths, you should pop up a letter I wrote in this magazine of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff when there was a national security concern that actually turned out to be a stock hype about rare earths and our temporary Chinese dependence. It turns out that with trivial exceptions like erbium in fiber optic repeaters, it's the only one I can think of, all of the uses are readily substitutable and usually by cheaper things. For example, you don't need rare earths at all for motors, for supermagnets. You can do the same thing better with a switched reluctance motor and no magnets, better and cheaper. And there are certain uses in batteries, I agree, but rather limited. And there are also new battery chemistries that use neither rare earths nor lithium. And that have very interesting properties. Some of them have extremely high ionic conduction polymers. Some have other chemistries like sodium, manganese, aluminium, water, and cotton one. But lithium doesn't have all of the interesting potential. We can talk more offline about this. Sir?
So I have a question for you. Thank you very much for this topic. And I'm a sociologist by training. I teach strategy here. And one thing I've seen over and over again is that the pace of innovation and the adoption of new technologies is not driven by sheer efficiency, but is driven by a pain point, a crisis. And in recent years, globally, we've seen that with high energy costs. Of course, energy costs are much lower now. At the same time, I think with China, you have a much more tangible problem right now, which is actually the high levels of pollution. So globally, I mean, like, assuming that like the reduced demand for petroleum drives down the energy cost overall, do you see that actually this influencing your timescale for adoption? Although eventually I see that this happening.
No, remember, first of all, that other than biofuels, all the renewables are making electricity, which has almost nothing to do with oil. So they're competing in different markets. And indeed, we have seen renewables further accelerate and get more investment since the oil price drop. There is an indirect connection through natural gas prices, but it's also rather a weak and slow one. And I think in China, it's clear that air pollution is the primary driver, particularly under the dome. And the way it was released, I think, clearly signals there is a very strong official desire at very high levels to mobilize public understanding and support for enforcing the environmental rules and cleaning up the air. And of course, the short-term way to do that is about mainly, aside from wearing good HEPA masks, to burn cleaner fuels in a cleaner way. But in Chinese medicine, I believe there's an important distinction between relieving symptoms and curing root causes. And the root causes were burning way too much fossil fuel. So that solution goes to efficiency and renewables, and I'm happy to tell you that this is not costly but profitable to the tune of probably tens of trillions of yuan. The pain point is different in different societies, but in China it's really clear. However, if I were the PLA, I would be very concerned about conflict potential, the vulnerability of the grid, the tensions in the neighborhood. You know, if as a national security professional, I would want to relieve those problems too. That would be my pain point. I don't want to have to go to war. I don't want to put my country at risk. That's my job. So everybody's got a different area of focus. If I were the Chinese leadership, I would be very interested in promoting a broad culture of innovation that will keep producing the high value added, low impact, clean green growth that China and the world need. So, you know, there are a lot of different motives, but they all converge on the same result. And that's a very good thing.
Okay, maybe we more last question.
Provost?
It showed a lot of very nicely converging trend. And I guess from the economic scale and from a technological innovation viewpoint, they seem to be happening naturally almost. Where is the barrier?
Well, as a Taoist, I think a lot of Wu Wei is called for. And in fact, I carry around a little Tao just to remind me what to not do. This is not a result we need to get to by forcing and interfering, but by going with the flow and helping things unfold in the way that they naturally want to. There are, however, losers as well as winners. I expect that the coal industry is not altogether happy with these trends. I just keynoted the Oslo Energy Forum, which is a meeting of about 150 senior oil executives. They were rather in a state of shock because they didn't quite realize that insurgents could set the pace and that their real problem was not so much falling prices, vanishing demand. I mean, they have the same problem that the coal and electricity industries have. It's not enough to have price greater than cost. So, of course, they want higher price and lower cost. You must also have value greater than price. And if insurgents provide a better value proposition and get to the customers and grab the revenues before you do, you're toast. It doesn't matter how profitable your business is. There are also 60 or 80 specific market failures in buying energy efficiency. Happily, each one can be turned into a business opportunity. That takes relentless patience and meticulous attention to detail. It doesn't happen automatically. Like in the commercial property value chain, there are about 24 parties, all speaking different languages, using different metrics. They can't communicate well with each other, and each with stunning perfection, rewarded for inefficiency and penalized for efficiency. You can fix each of those, but anyone can be a showstopper. So it's not a simple, trivial, automatic solution. It takes a lot of entrepreneurs and policymakers really working hard. But it's easier than the alternative. Sir?
Dr. Lovins, in Hong Kong we have virtually no trigen. What do you think about the possibility of a university like this one or a large public hospital using trigen, given that we are likely to be using natural gas for a lot of our electricity generation for quite a few years? One problem on this at the moment for us is that our gas supply system in Hong Kong is still effectively a coal gas system. We take natural gas and naphtha and we convert it into what we call town gas, which is effectively coal gas. We have a 500,000 tonne a year carbon footprint from the plant that does that.
I didn't know you were still doing coal gas. Good heavens, that's Victorian. Oh my. And by the way, it makes a lot of very nasty polycyclic aromatics you have to do something with. Well, trigeneration, if you're going to burn something, is clearly much more sensible than just making one thing. You're making electricity and heating and cooling. And by the way, other things. You can, for example, make, in some cases, sweet water. You may be able to do terminal reheat, although it's better to design it out. You can do domestic water heat. We've done about a 6 or 7 layer system with 92% system efficiency. I think the world record is 93. Maybe you know of a better one. If so, it was probably invented here. But yes, it makes a lot of thermodynamic and usually economic sense to get many benefits from that precious fuel. And if you're not doing that, you're probably throwing away a good deal of value. About the fuel, is the town gas really economic? We should talk offline, but it sounds like an artifact. You would think with the drop in LNG price, that would be better. Biogas would be better. Burning energy studies might be the simplest.
We only have one supplier that pipes gas around town.
Good heavens. I'd like to learn more about that, but yes, I think we've identified another interesting opportunity. Best of all, of course, is to design out the demands. The efficiency will probably beat town gas or anything else.
Okay, with that, let us thank Avery again for this really wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And before we finish, we will have a little souvenir for you from our university, presented by Provost.
It shows the history of science and technology evolution in Chinese history. So hopefully something you have presented we can make a small contribution to add to this.
Well, thank you. I've actually looked at the innovation history of China through the work of Joseph Needham and others.
Yes.
And China invented the fossil fuel industries, coal, oil, and gas, 1,000 to 2,000 years ago, and most of the renewables 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. My house where I grow the bananas is about 6,000-year-old North Chinese passive solar architecture plus super windows. Thank you.
Okay, with that,
Thank you. Thank you.